The train screeched to a halt in the dead of night. Its wheels screamed against the rusted tracks, sending sparks into the frigid air. Outside, snow drifted down in thick sheets, burying the iron rails and smothering the world in silence. The men inside the cattle car didn't notice the beauty of it. Their breath hung in the air like smoke, their bodies pressed together for warmth, their eyes hollow. Thomas Rourke pressed his forehead against the wooden slats of the train, letting a blade of icy wind cut across his face. He was 22, a soldier from Dublin who had volunteered with the British Army. Captured somewhere outside Warsaw when his unit was overrun, he had been crammed into this train with 100 others, strangers now bound by hunger, fear, and the rattle of the rails. He could barely remember how many days had passed. 3, 5, 10. The guards outside had stopped shouting. There was only the sound of boots crunching on frozen gravel. Then a beam of light sliced through the darkness, a lantern swinging. The iron door of the cattle car rattled, bolts drawn back with a groan. "Rouse," a voice barked. The prisoner stumbled out, legs stiff, hands shaking from cold. Thomas's boots hit the ground, sinking into snow up to his shins. The cold was immediate, like knives pressed to his skin. He looked around. Beyond the rail tracks stretched a forest of black pines, their branches sagging with ice. And behind them, looming like a shadow, was a structure. It was not a camp, at least not in the way he had expected. No barbed wire, no guard towers, no gates hung with slogans. Instead, it looked like an old sanatorium, a 3-story building with steep gables and rows of windows, all shuttered. Its walls were stained yellow as if the stone itself had jaundiced. Smoke rose from one chimney, thin and gray, curling into the storm. "Move!" The butt of a rifle struck Thomas's back. He staggered forward, clutching his ribs. The column of prisoners was herded toward the building, their shadows stretching across the snow under the lantern light. As they drew closer, Thomas felt unease gnawing at him. This place didn't resemble the work camps he'd heard rumors of. It looked like a hospital, yes, but there was something wrong in the stillness, in the way no lights glowed behind the shutters, no voices murmured, no footsteps echoed. Only the crunch of boots, the shuffle of broken men, and the distant creak of trees bending under ice. At the entrance, a pair of men in white coats stood waiting. Their faces were obscured by masks, not the cloth masks of doctors, but heavy leather contraptions that covered the nose and mouth, straps biting into their skulls. Their eyes gleamed behind round glass lenses. "Registrierin'," one of them muttered, voice muffled through the mask. He carried a clipboard, his gloved hand already moving in quick strokes of pencil. The other doctor, if that's what they were, examined the prisoners one by one. He would grip their chins, tilt their faces toward the lantern light, force their mouths open to inspect teeth, even press his thumbs into their eye sockets until the men cried out. When he reached Thomas, the gloved fingers smelled faintly of chemicals, sharp and bitter, like disinfectant that burned the nose. "Age," the man in white demanded. 22, Thomas rasped. The pencil scratched across paper. The man's grip lingered on his face, thumb pressing hard under his jaw as if feeling the structure of the bone. Then he let go, scribbled something, and shoved him toward the doors. Inside, the sanatorium smelled of rot masked by bleach. The floorboards creaked under the weight of dozens of boots. Shadows danced across high ceilings where chandeliers once hung. Now only the chains remained, swaying gently. The prisoners were divided into groups, pushed down separate corridors. Thomas was herded down a long hall with 20 others. The walls here were tiled white, but the years had yellowed them. Cracks spread like veins through the ceramic. Along the hallway doors lined both sides, each with a small square window covered by wire mesh. Thomas glimpsed movement behind one door, the flick of a hand, the blur of an eye. Someone was already inside. Someone watching. At the end of the hall, a guard unlocked a door and barked, "Rain!" They stumbled into a bare room. Metal cots lined the walls, each with a thin, lice-ridden mattress. A single bulb hung from the ceiling, flickering weakly. The windows were barred and frosted with ice. The door slammed shut, the lock clanging. For the first time since capture, silence fell. The men collapsed onto the cots, too exhausted even to speak. Thomas sat on the edge of one, rubbing his frozen hands together. His stomach knotted from hunger, but his mind was sharper than it had been in days. Something was wrong about this place. The guards outside had not shouted like soldiers. They had spoken in low tones, respectful almost, to the men in white coats. And those masked figures, they had not looked at the prisoners as humans. They had looked at them as specimens. He lay back, staring at the flickering bulb. The hum of electricity filled the room, a sound too constant, too sharp. He closed his eyes, but his ears caught something faint, a scream muffled by distance carried through the vents in the walls. Then silence again. When sleep came, it was shallow and restless. He dreamed of water rising around him, of cold hands holding him under, of needles glinting in the dark. He woke with a start, sweat freezing against his skin. The bulb still flickered overhead. The others lay in uneasy sleep, their breath clouding the air. But Thomas kept his eyes open, staring at the door, waiting, because he knew they would come back. And when they did, it would not be for questions. It would be for something much worse. The sound of the lock was like a hammer against the skull. Metal scraped against metal, the bolt sliding back with slow deliberation. The men in the cell stirred, groaning, squinting in the thin light. The door opened. 2 guards entered first, rifles slung, boots striking the tile with sharp rhythm. Behind them came the men in white coats, 3 of them this time. All wore the same leather masks, lenses catching the bulb's weak glow. One carried a tray of instruments, syringes lined in neat rows, glass vials filled with cloudy liquid that glimmered in shades of yellow and green. Another held a thick notebook bound in black leather. "Aufstehen," a guard barked. The prisoners hesitated. The guards raised rifles and the men scrambled to their feet, some wobbling, too weak to stand straight. Thomas rose slowly, eyes fixed on the tray. The syringes seemed impossibly long, the needles catching the light like blades. The man with the notebook flipped it open and began reading names. Each name was followed by a number, a series of digits written in cold precision. When he called, a guard shoved the prisoner forward. The doctor with the tray set down the instruments on a cot, disinfected the man's arm with a rag that smelled of alcohol, and drove the needle in without hesitation. The plunger sank slowly, pressing the unknown liquid into the vein. The prisoners whimpered, some cried out, but none resisted. What could they do? They were cattle in a slaughterhouse. When Thomas's turn came, his stomach twisted into knots. He stepped forward, sleeves rolled roughly by a guard. The doctor grasped his arm with surprising strength, fingers like iron clamps. The needle pierced. Cold fire spread up his vein. His jaw clenched as the burning liquid raced to his shoulder, then down his chest. His heartbeat quickened, pounding so loud he thought it might burst through his ribs. His vision blurred, a haze crawling over his eyes. The doctor released him. "Biobactin," he muttered to the one with the notebook. "Observe." Thomas staggered back, clutching his arm. His breath came in shallow gasps. Heat roared through his body, though the room was freezing. Sweat broke across his forehead. His knees buckled, but he caught the cot frame and stayed upright. Around him, others collapsed. One man convulsed violently on the floor, his heels thudding against tile. Foam spilled from his mouth. Another clutched his throat as if choking on air, eyes bulging. The doctors watched, impassive, scribbling notes. Not a flicker of emotion passed behind their glass lenses. After what felt like hours but was only minutes, the convulsions slowed. The men lay groaning, trembling, alive but broken. The doctors gathered their instruments, snapped the notebook shut, and left without a word. The door clanged shut, the lock sliding home. Silence settled again, but it was different now. Not the silence of sleep. The silence of men realizing they were no longer entirely human. The hours crawled by. Thomas sat with his back against the wall, every muscle twitching as if worms crawled beneath his skin. His veins throbbed like cords pulled too tight. His teeth chattered, though sweat drenched his shirt. Across from him, a Frenchman named Duval whispered prayers, hands clasped tight. His lips trembled as if he were still mouthing words even when no sound came. On the cot beside Thomas, a Polish boy, no more than 18, lay curled, shivering. His skin had taken on a gray pallor, his eyes bloodshot. Every few minutes he whispered, "Mama," in a weak, cracked voice. Thomas pressed his palms to his temples. The room tilted, swaying like a ship on rough seas. Shadows writhed on the walls, though the bulb remained steady. He blinked hard, but the shapes didn't vanish. They twisted, elongating, forming grotesque silhouettes. Men without faces, their limbs bending the wrong way. He shut his eyes. The images stayed, etched on the insides of his lids. "Stay awake," he muttered to himself. "Don't let them in." The next day, if it was day at all, for the windows let in no sun, the door opened again. More guards. More white coats. This time they brought stretchers. 6 men were taken away, those who had convulsed the worst, those too weak to rise from the floor. The Polish boy was lifted by 2 guards, his head lolling, mouth slack. His eyes flicked to Thomas for a moment, wide and wet with terror. Then he was gone, carried into the hall, swallowed by the darkness beyond. The rest of them were ordered to stand. The guards herded them into a line and marched them down the corridor. They passed doors with the same wire mesh windows. Behind one, Thomas saw a man strapped upright against the wall, his chest bare. Tubes ran into his arms, one pumping fluid in, another draining blood out into glass jars stacked like trophies. His eyes rolled back, lips moving silently. Behind another door, 2 prisoners knelt in freezing water up to their waists. Their skin was mottled blue, teeth chattering so violently the sound carried through the glass. A doctor with a stopwatch observed, recording each tremor. The line moved faster. Thomas fought the urge to turn his head, but the images burned themselves into his mind anyway. Finally they reached a large chamber. The air was colder here, visible with every breath. A square pit filled the center of the room, steel walls coated with frost. One by one, prisoners were forced to strip naked. Guards shoved them into the pit, where ice water surged from hidden pipes. The temperature was unbearable. Men gasped, screamed, tried to climb out, but rifles pointed down kept them inside. Thomas was shoved forward. He resisted a fraction too long, and a guard cracked him across the back with a rifle butt. He stumbled into the pit, icy water searing his flesh like fire. His lungs seized. His body spasmed, teeth slamming together. Above, a doctor with a stopwatch called out numbers. Another scribbled notes. Minutes stretched into eternities. His muscles cramped, his heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. The water climbed into his skull, numbing thought, numbing everything. When they finally dragged him out, he collapsed on the tile, shivering uncontrollably. A guard dumped a bucket of freezing water over him, not to warm him but to test how his body reacted to deeper shock. The doctors leaned close, inspecting his skin, pressing fingers against his neck to count the pulse. Then, without a word, they moved to the next subject. Thomas lay trembling, his body broken open to the cold, but a different chill rooted deeper, the knowledge that he was not meant to survive here. He was meant to be studied, dismantled, and discarded. And there was nothing human in the eyes behind those glass lenses. That night, back in the cell, the silence was heavier. The Frenchman Duval whispered no prayers. His lips were cracked, blood on his teeth. He stared at the floor, unblinking, muttering a single word again and again in his tongue, a word Thomas didn't understand, but the tone was clear: surrender. Thomas tried to sleep, but the cold wouldn't let him. Neither would the screams drifting through the vents, faint, distant, but constant. Screams that stretched too long to belong to ordinary men. He pressed his palms over his ears, but the sound seeped through skin and bone, crawling into his skull. And in the spaces between screams there was laughter. Oh, clinical. Like someone had found exactly what they were looking for. The corridor smelled different now. Not just of bleach and cold metal, but of something sour underneath: decay, sickness, blood. Thomas had learned to recognize it the way a man recognizes the scent of fire before he sees the smoke. It clung to his hair, his clothes, even the back of his throat. He and the others were herded out of the cell again. Their numbers had thinned. Where there had been 20, now 12 shuffled down the hall in a line of bones wrapped in rags. The guards didn't need to shout anymore. The men obeyed quickly, instinct drilled by fear and exhaustion. At the end of the corridor, a door opened into another chamber Thomas hadn't seen before. It was brighter, harsh lamps fixed to the ceiling, their glare bouncing off metal tables arranged in rows. Trays of instruments gleamed: scalpels, clamps, syringes thicker than a man's finger. Glass jars lined shelves on the far wall, filled with cloudy liquid in which floated pale shapes. Fingers, organs, even something that looked like an infant curled into itself. The men in white coats were waiting. This time they weren't masked. Thomas's stomach lurched. Their faces should have been human, but something about them was wrong. Their skin was pale and stretched too tight, their hair cropped to stubble. Their eyes were small, sunken, glinting with feverish light. The absence of masks made it worse. It showed how little expression they wore, how utterly detached their mouths remained even as they prepared instruments that would slice open living men. The one with the notebook raised his hand. Begin. The guards seized prisoners in pairs, forcing them onto the metal tables. Leather straps bound wrists, ankles, chest. The sound of buckles tightening filled the room, followed by the metallic rattle of trays being moved into place. Thomas's turn came quickly. 2 guards pushed him down, pinning his arms while the straps dug into his skin. He fought, not out of courage but pure animal panic. The restraints cut deeper, burning against his wrists. A doctor leaned over him, adjusting a lamp so the light seared into his eyes. Without a word, he jabbed a needle into Thomas's neck. Thomas gasped as something thick surged into his bloodstream, not the quick burn of alcohol, but a sluggish poison that made his vision tunnel. The ceiling seemed to ripple like water. The lamps swam in circles. His heartbeat slowed, then quickened, pounding erratically. Sweat chilled instantly on his skin. He tried to speak, but his tongue felt heavy, his lips numb. Pupil response, erratic. The doctor muttered, voice distant. Note temperature rise. Proceed with incision. Incision. Thomas's stomach clenched. His eyes darted toward the scalpel gleaming at the doctor's side. His chest heaved against the straps, breath ragged. But instead of cutting, the doctor pressed cold instruments against his skin, measuring pulse, checking reflexes with quick taps. Another injected him again, this time into his arm. His muscles seized, contracting so violently the straps creaked. His jaw locked until his teeth ached. Fascinating, one of them said, as though examining a rare specimen in a museum. The world blurred. His mind flickered in and out, thoughts scattering like leaves in a gale. When he blinked, he saw flashes. The corridor flooded with blood up to his knees, shadows moving in the water. A face leaning over him that wasn't human but stretched into a grin wider than any mouth should go. Then he blinked again and it was gone. Just the white coats, the lamps, the smell of iodine. Hours seemed to pass. Or maybe minutes. The injections continued, alternating between fire and ice in his veins. Sometimes his body convulsed uncontrollably, sometimes he lay limp, unable to move a finger. And all the while the doctor scribbled notes, muttering phrases that meant nothing but carried the weight of doom. When they released him, Thomas crumpled to the floor, too weak to crawl. Guards dragged him back to the cell, dumping him like a sack of grain. The others returned in similar states. Some twitched in their sleep, limbs jerking. Others stared at the ceiling with blank eyes, lips parted in silent gasps. Duval, the Frenchman, did not return. Hours later, or what felt like hours, Thomas heard a sound through the vent above his cot. Not the screams this time, but voices. They hold longer than expected, one doctor said in clipped German. Yes, this batch is strong. The serum must be adjusted. More exposure to cold first, then repeat injections. And the failures? Dispose of them. Record the results. Thomas pressed his fists to his ears, but the voices were inside him now, burrowing. Dispose. Record. Failures. Words that didn't apply to soldiers or prisoners or even men, only to lab rats. Sleep came in jagged fragments. In one dream he was back home, walking the streets of Dublin under gray skies. His mother waved from the doorway of their house, but when he drew near, her face split down the middle, peeling open like a mask to reveal glass lenses staring back. He woke screaming, sweat freezing on his body. The bulb overhead flickered, once, twice, then steadied. A whisper came from the far corner. The Polish boy. His voice was thin, rasping. They change us. Thomas crawled closer, heart hammering. What did you say? The boy's eyes gleamed fever bright. His lips cracked with every word. They put things inside. Not just medicine. I heard them. I felt it. He clutched his stomach, gagging, then fell silent, trembling. Thomas stared, horror chilling him deeper than any ice water. He thought of the jars in the lab, the cloudy liquids, the vials filled with things that moved as though alive. What had they injected? And how long before it began to change him too? The next summons came sooner. Guards unlocked the cell and dragged half the men out. Thomas was among them. They were led down a different hallway this time, deeper into the building. The air grew colder, the walls lined with frost. At the end was a vast chamber, unlike anything Thomas had seen yet. Glass tanks lined the walls, filled with liquid that bubbled faintly. Figures floated inside, suspended by tubes. Some looked human. Others not quite. Too tall, too thin, limbs stretched unnaturally. Their faces were slack, eyes closed, but their chests rose and fell as though still breathing underwater. The prisoners froze, staring in horror. A doctor stepped forward, his notebook in hand. Observe, he said to the guards. They must understand the purpose. He tapped the glass of one tank. The figure inside twitched, its eyes snapping open. Pale, lidless eyes that glowed faintly under the lamps. One of the prisoners screamed. A guard silenced him with a blow from his rifle. Thomas felt his own legs trembling. His chest heaved, but the air felt thin, poisoned. His mind tried to reject what he saw, but the truth was clear. This was not medicine. Not treatment. Not even research. This was creation. They were building something here. And Thomas, along with the others, was raw material. The figure in the glass tank pressed its palm against the wall. Its skin was pale, almost translucent, veins branching beneath like blue ink drawn across parchment. The fingers were too long, the joints bent at strange angles. Thomas stared, frozen, as its eyes opened wider, or rather as lids stretched back to reveal something lidless and raw. It looked at him. Not at the room, not at the doctor, not at the guards. At him. A shiver ran down his spine. He wanted to look away, but he couldn't. The doctor tapped the glass again and the thing twitched, retreating slightly. A tube in its throat pumped bubbles through the liquid. "You see," the doctor said in clipped, careful German, his voice echoing in the chamber. "The process is effective. The subjects endure. Their bodies adapt." He turned to the guards. "Take them." The prisoners were shoved toward the far end of the room, where cages stood in rows. They weren't animal cages. They were too tall, too narrow, meant for humans. Iron bars ran from floor to ceiling, doors locked with heavy bolts. Inside some of them lay bodies. Some moved faintly, twitching. Others did not move at all. Thomas was pushed into one, the lock slamming behind him. The metal was ice cold against his back. His breath fogged the air as he clutched the bars, eyes scanning the shadows. In the cage to his left, a man crouched low. His skin was gray, his head shaved. When Thomas whispered, "Are you alive?" the man turned slowly. His eyes were huge and glassy, reflecting the light like an animal's. His lips moved, but no sound came, only a hiss, wet and broken. Thomas recoiled. The doctor moved down the row, notebook open, speaking as he inspected them. "Observe the stages. Some subjects degrade. Others evolve. We must record every variance. Each failure teaches us." One of the prisoners shouted, "You're monsters." His voice cracked, echoing against the tile. "This isn't medicine. It's..." A guard silenced him with the rifle, but, cracking his jaw, blood sprayed across the bars. The man fell limp, groaning. The doctor only scribbled a note, as if recording a minor detail. Hours passed. Or maybe days. The cages held them like animals, fed with bowls of thin soup slid across the floor. Some men refused to eat. Others devoured the food like wolves, driven by a hunger deeper than their fear. Thomas forced himself to swallow. His stomach churned, but the hunger always won. At night, if it was night, the chamber echoed with sounds. Groans from the cages. The clank of glass against steel as the figures in the tanks twitched. And sometimes, movement in the shadows. Guards dragging bodies across the floor, leaving streaks that froze black against the cold stone. Once Thomas saw them dump a man into a tank. He thrashed violently as liquid filled his lungs. Bubbles rose in a frantic stream. His hands pounded the glass, leaving red smears where his skin tore. Then he went still, floating limp as tubes fed into him. The next day his eyes opened again. One by one, prisoners were removed from their cages and taken through a steel door at the far end. Some returned. Others did not. Those who came back looked different. A man who had been taken in shivering silence returned days later, eyes glazed, pupils dilated. He didn't speak anymore. He only crouched in his cage, head twitching, teeth chattering, though the chamber was no colder than before. Another returned with scars across his chest, stitches that crisscrossed like a butcher's work. His skin oozed where the thread pulled too tight. He rocked back and forth, whispering to himself, "Not me, not me, not me," until his voice went hoarse. Then there was the boy, the Polish boy who had called for his mother. When they brought him back, he didn't look human. His skin sagged, gray and mottled. His arms hung longer, bones stretched as though pulled by unseen hands. His mouth twitched constantly, lips peeling back to show teeth too sharp, too many. He pressed himself against the bars of his cage and hissed when Thomas looked at him. Thomas's stomach turned. He clutched the bars and whispered, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." But the boy only hissed again, eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. The next time the doctors came, they brought something new. A cart rolled into the chamber, covered with a sheet. One of the white coats pulled it back to reveal a machine. Metal coils, glass tubes, a generator that hummed with electricity. Wires ended in clamps, their teeth sharp as fangs. The prisoners were dragged out, one at a time, strapped into chairs. The clamps were fastened to their temples, their chests, their limbs. When the switch was thrown, arcs of blue light crackled through the air. The smell of burning flesh filled the chamber. Thomas watched, heart hammering, as men screamed until their voices broke, then slumped unconscious. The doctors measured the time it took for each to collapse. They adjusted dials, recorded notes, repeated the process. When his turn came, Thomas was shoved into the chair. Leather straps bit into his wrists and ankles. The clamps dug into his skin, cold and sharp. The hum of the generator rose. His chest tightened. Then the world exploded. White fire seared his skull, ripping through nerves, through bone, through thought. His jaw locked, teeth grinding together until he thought they would shatter. His body convulsed, arching against the straps. He screamed, or thought he screamed. No sound reached his own ears, only the roar of electricity devouring him. When it ended, he slumped forward, smoke rising faintly from his skin. His vision swam with ghostly shapes, shadows dancing in the corners. He tried to speak, but only a rasp escaped his throat. The doctor leaned close, checking his eyes. He resists. Stronger than the others. He scribbled in his notebook. Repeat tomorrow. They dragged him back to his cage. His body shook uncontrollably, muscles spasming. He clutched the bars, breath ragged. Across the chamber, the Polish boy stared at him with those glowing eyes, lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. That night, Thomas couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw flashes of light, heard screams, felt straps biting his skin. He rocked on the floor of the cage, whispering to himself, "Hold on, hold on, hold on." But deep inside, a darker thought gnawed. What if he wasn't holding on? What if the changes had already begun? He pressed his hand to his arm where the injections had burned days before. The skin there twitched beneath his touch, muscles spasming as if something crawled just under the surface. He bit down on his fist to keep from crying out. Because in this place, weakness wasn't comforted. It was recorded. And used. The following morning, or what passed for morning, the steel door at the far end opened. Guards entered with chains. The doctors spoke softly among themselves, their words clipped, efficient. One pointed toward Thomas's cage. "Bring him." The guards unlocked the door. Cold iron snapped around his wrists. He was dragged across the chamber, past the tanks, past the other cages where broken men watched with dead eyes. The steel door loomed before him. For the first time since arriving, Thomas felt true terror. The tanks, the injections, the shocks, they were horrors, yes. But whatever lay beyond that door was something worse. Something final. The hinges groaned as the guards pulled it open. A blast of cold air hit him, carrying with it the stench of blood and chemicals. They shoved him inside. And the door closed behind him. The room beyond the steel door was colder than the chamber. Not the sharp cold of stone and winter air, but something deeper, a dead cold, the kind that seeped into bone and made breath turn brittle. The ceiling arched high above, pipes dripping condensation that froze before it hit the floor. Bright lamps hung low, casting cruel white light over rows of tables. And on the tables, bodies. Thomas's knees buckled, and the guards yanked him upright. He stumbled forward, gagging at the stench. The bodies weren't whole. Some had torsos sewn with thick black thread, stitched together like dolls. Some had arms replaced, too long, too heavy, clearly not their own. Others had skulls opened and sealed with metal plates, wires snaking from beneath into machines that pulsed with a sickly rhythm. One table held what looked like 3 men fused together at the chest, their faces slack, mouths half open. A single groan escaped them, a chorus of voices trying to form words that no longer existed. The guards shoved Thomas to his knees in the center of the room. He tried not to look, but the lamps forced him to see everything. A doctor entered, this one different from the others. His coat was darker, his gloves red to the wrists. He carried no notebook, only a scalpel that gleamed in the light. "Subject 47, he said, his voice calm, almost kind. Strong response to serum. Survived electroshock with minimal degradation. Promising. He crouched, meeting Thomas's eyes. "You are valuable." Thomas shook his head violently. I'm not your experiment." His voice cracked, but the words came anyway, desperate. "I'm a man. A soldier." The doctor tilted his head as if studying a puzzle. Not for long. They strapped Thomas onto a table, leather biting into his wrists and ankles. The lamps burned his skin. He struggled, but the straps didn't move. Above him, the doctor held up a syringe. The needle was longer than his finger, filled with a liquid so dark it looked black. "This," the doctor said softly, "will show us what you can become." The needle sank into Thomas's neck. Fire spread instantly, crawling beneath his skin. His veins felt as if they would burst, his chest clamped tight, vision fracturing into shards. He screamed until his throat tore raw. The doctor leaned over him, watching with fascination as his body convulsed. "Yes," he murmured. "Yes. Perfect." Time fractured. Thomas drifted in and out of consciousness, lost in fever and terror. Sometimes he was aware of the straps biting into his wrists, of cold hands prying open his chest. Sometimes he floated in a red haze, hearing voices chanting in German, words that blurred together. And sometimes, he saw things that weren't there. The boy with glowing eyes whispering, "Join us." The stitched bodies, mouths opening to speak his name. His mother standing at the foot of the table whispering, "Don't let them take you." When he woke again, his chest was covered in stitches. The skin around them burned, swollen. His veins pulsed black where the serum had entered. But he was alive. And that meant the doctor wasn't finished. In the days that followed, if days could be counted in a place without windows, Thomas was tested again and again. They cut him open, stitched him closed, forced him into tanks where liquid filled his lungs until he nearly drowned. They attached wires to his head, sending currents through him until his vision turned white. Each time he survived. The doctor watched with something like admiration. "You are stronger than the rest. You endure. You are the future." But Thomas felt something else growing inside him. Not strength. Not endurance. Something darker. At night, strapped in his cage, he felt his skin twitching, bones aching. His reflection in the tank glass looked wrong. His eyes too bright, his face thinner, his teeth sharper. And worse, he could hear them now. The others. The failures. The things that hissed in cages and twitched on tables. "Join us. Become. Feed." The voices crawled into his mind, whispering in unison. He pressed his fists against his ears, but the whispers were inside, burrowing deep. One night, or what passed for night, the alarm sounded. A crash echoed through the chamber. A tank had shattered, flooding the floor with liquid. The creature inside, one of the twisted forms with arms too long and mouth too wide, had broken free. Guards shouted. Rifles cracked. The thing tore through them, ripping flesh, spraying blood across the stone walls. In the chaos, cages were overturned. Prisoners screamed, some running, some too broken to move. Thomas's cage door bent under the weight of bodies slamming into it. The bolt snapped. He stumbled out, dizzy, his stitches tearing. Blood leaked down his chest. The doctor shouted orders, but his voice was drowned out by gunfire and screams. The lights flickered. Shadows danced. And Thomas ran. He stumbled through corridors lined with pipes, the air thick with smoke and blood. Guards fired blindly into the dark. A creature shrieked. A sound not human, not animal, something else. He ducked into a side hall, clutching his chest, every step agony. His stitches pulled, but adrenaline drove him forward. Behind him, he heard it, not the guards, not the doctor, but something following. Something that moved on too many limbs, dragging itself closer. He turned a corner, found a steel door, shoved it open. The room beyond was dark, silent, empty. He slammed the door shut, leaning against it, gasping for breath. Then he looked around. Rows of tanks glowed faintly in the dark. Dozens of them. Maybe hundreds. And inside each, a shape. Some human. Some not. All waiting. Their eyes opened as one. Thomas staggered back, heart pounding so loud he thought it would burst. The eyes followed him, glowing faintly in the green liquid. Some blinked slowly. Others pressed hands against the glass, fingers long, nails sharp. A whisper filled the room. Not from one voice, but from all of them at once. "Join us." He clutched his head, shaking it violently. "No. I'm not, I won't." But his body betrayed him. His veins burned. His stitches tore. He fell to his knees, screaming as pain ripped through him. The tanks rattled as if something inside them heard his agony and answered. And in that moment, Thomas knew the truth. He wasn't escaping. He was becoming. Thomas's body writhed on the floor, every nerve burning, every muscle tearing. The serum inside him pulsed like fire, spreading, reshaping. His stitches burst open, black blood spilling down his chest. He clawed at his skin, but it shifted beneath his nails as though it no longer belonged to him. Above him, the tanks glowed brighter, the shapes inside stirring. Their whispers grew louder, blending into a chorus. Become. 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 The sound wasn't just in his ears. It was inside his skull, vibrating through his bones, pulling at the last threads of his mind. He tried to scream, but what left his throat wasn't human. A guttural roar shook the room, rattling the glass. His teeth tore longer, sharper. His fingers bent, nails curving into claws. And then silence. The tanks went still. Thomas staggered to his feet, chest heaving. He stared at his hands, dripping blood, twisted and monstrous. His reflection stared back at him in the nearest tank. A face stretched thin, eyes glowing faintly, mouth lined with teeth that didn't belong to any man. The voice inside him whispered, softer now, almost tender. "Now you are one of us." The alarms blared again, shrill and deafening. Guards burst into the room, rifles raised. They froze when they saw him. For a moment no one moved. Then the doctor stepped through the door, calm, composed even as chaos raged beyond. His eyes gleamed when he saw Thomas. "Yes," he whispered. "Perfect. The final stage." He raised his hand. "Seize him." The guards hesitated. None of them dared move closer. Thomas felt something rising inside him. Not fear, not weakness, but hunger. A deep, endless hunger. He lunged. The first guard barely had time to scream before Thomas's claws tore through him. Blood sprayed across the tanks, painting the glass red. Another tried to fire, but Thomas moved faster, ripping the rifle from his hands and snapping his neck in a single motion. The others fled, stumbling over each other, their shouts drowned by the sound of tearing flesh and cracking bone. The doctor did not move. He only watched, scribbling notes even as his creation slaughtered his men. "Magnificent," he whispered. "Truly magnificent." The facility descended into chaos. Tanks shattered one after another, flooding the floor with liquid. The creatures inside stumbled free, crawling, hissing, shrieking. Some collapsed instantly, their twisted bodies too broken to survive. Others staggered upright, joining the slaughter. The halls ran red. Guards fired blindly, but bullets barely slowed the things that had once been men. Doors were torn from hinges, walls splattered with gore. And through it all, Thomas moved like a storm, half man, half beast, leaving only ruin in his wake. Yet inside him, a fragment of Thomas remained. A fragment that screamed, that begged, that whispered, "Stop, please stop," as his body obeyed the hunger instead. The doctor followed, calm amidst the horror. He wrote furiously, his eyes alight. "You are proof," he murmured. "Proof that we can transcend humanity. Proof that pain creates perfection." Thomas turned on him, blood dripping from his claws, chest heaving. His glowing eyes locked on the man who had made him this way. For a heartbeat, the world froze. Then Thomas lunged. The doctor's body hit the wall with a sickening crack. Thomas's claws tore him open, spilling notes and blood alike across the floor. The doctor gasped once, almost smiling, before his eyes went dim. And with his death, something shifted. The alarms cut out. The lights flickered and died. The entire facility groaned, stone and steel trembling as if the building itself were collapsing under the weight of its horrors. Thomas staggered through the smoke-filled corridors, blood dripping from his hands. Behind him, the screams of guards and creatures alike blended into a single inhuman chorus. He stumbled into a stairwell, climbing toward the faintest hint of fresh air. His stitches had torn open again, black blood staining every step, but he forced himself upward. At last he burst through a rusted hatch, and froze. The night sky stretched above him, wide and starless. Snow fell in thick, silent sheets, covering the barren ground. The cold bit into his skin, but he hardly felt it anymore. For the first time in what felt like years, he breathed air untainted by smoke and blood. But freedom did not bring peace, because he wasn't Thomas anymore. He looked down at his hands, claws. At his reflection in the snow, monstrous. His stomach twisted with hunger, a hunger that no soup, no bread, no human meal could ever satisfy. Behind him, the facility collapsed inward, the earth swallowing its secrets. Flames burst from broken vents, black smoke rising into the sky. The screams faded into silence. Thomas stood alone in the snow, trembling, broken, remade. And then, from the forest beyond the hill, he heard it. A voice, whispering. Not from inside his head this time. From others. "Join us." Shapes moved in the treeline. Dozens of them. Twisted figures, pale and glowing-eyed, watching him. Waiting. Thomas fell to his knees, breath fogging in the night air. And for the first time since the experiments began, he smiled. Because he knew he was not alone. Years later, when villagers whispered of shadows in the woods, of livestock torn apart, of travelers who vanished without a trace, they spoke of them as legends. Monsters, spirits, demons. But the truth was simpler. The experiments had not ended. They had escaped. And Thomas led them.